Throughout the history of NASCAR, there have been many chassis built at first for racing in the NASCAR Cup Series and NASCAR Xfinity Series that have later been sold off to ARCA teams. This is a result of ARCA using very similar cars to when NASCAR used the Generation 4 cars at first. Very few differences were required and many teams would keep the same bodies on the cars. However, through the late 2010s, ARCA switched to the current 5-star composite bodies, which were meant to look similar to Generation 6 cars used in Cup. However, many teams have opted to still run chassis built for Generation 4, 5, and 6 cars. In fact, only Venerini Motorsports and Rev Racing still build their own chassis for ARCA competition. Many teams in ARCA have smaller budgets and cannot afford to build their own chassis and resort to using older ones. Many prefer the Gen 4 chassis as it handles better with the composite bodies. But one team in particular that has had many chassis passed down to ARCA is Robert Yates Racing. In this video, I will be covering 5 notable chassis from Robert Yates Racing that have competed in ARCA in the past, and some of these still compete in the series now. Our first chassis in this video happens to probably be the most significant, RYR35. Likely built in the 1997-1998 off-season as a plate car, this was one of Robert Yates Racing's best cars in their fleet. Its first win is believed to be at the 1998 ARCA Daytona race, where Kenny Irwin Jr. won driving it. Later, it then won the fall race at Talladega in 1998 with Dale Jarrett driving, and the Pepsi 400 at Daytona in 1998, once again driven by Dale Jarrett, and then it also finished second at both Talladega races in 1999. And then, Jarrett was able to win the Great American Race from the pole in 2000, and won his third Daytona 500 in total after passing Johnny Benson with 5 laps to go. Most Daytona 500 cars that win are preserved after their year-long stay at the Daytona Museum, but Robert Yates Racing opted to not preserve the car and intended for Elliott Sadler to drive it in the 2003 Daytona 500. However, Sadler did not end up running the car in the 500 as the car was wrecked in a Tuesday practice session. Yates ended up selling the car off to Bobby Jones in the 2003-04 off-season, and Greg Sachs would drive the rebuilt number 88 Dodge in the 2004 ARCA race at Daytona. He led 12 laps, but unfortunately would crash out with 10 to go and finish 28th. Eddie Mercer then drove it in the 2005 running, and unfortunately crashed out on lap 12. It's unclear on if the car raced in 2006, but at some point between 2005 and 2007, the car was later sold to Bruco Motorsports and converted back to a Ford, and while it is unknown if it ran at Daytona, it did run at Talladega in the fall with full-time driver Philip McGilton piloting the 47. McGilton qualified in 4th but finished in 21st. Later, it would be sold off to Tommy Joe Martins and returned to Daytona again in 2010 in the number 95 Ford, where he qualified in 28th. He was able to stay out of trouble all day and finish in 8th as a result. Martins then ran the car again at Daytona in 2011, but the car would be converted back to a Dodge and renumbered to 26. Once again starting out in the back, Martins was able to avoid the big one mid-race and finish in 14th. It is unclear if RYR35 ended up racing again after that, but the legacy of this car will live on as the one that kept racing after winning the Daytona 500. Our second chassis is RYR42, which was likely built in the 04-05 off-season and ran its only Cup race in the 2005 spring race at Atlanta with Dale Jarrett driving the 88 car. Jarrett led 1 lap in this car during green flag pit stops, but would finish in 23rd place 2 laps down. Sometime after, Yates then sold the chassis off to Howard Bixman. Longtime ARCA veteran Brad Smith would later buy it, and would have longtime car owner James Harvey Hilton field RYR42, which Brad owned. It's unknown how many races it ran before 2017, but we do know that RYR42 ran 9 races in 2017 with Brad Smith behind the wheel. First ran in 2017 at Nashville to a 21st place finish, 13 laps down. Then finished 17th at Salem, 29 laps down. Then 17th at both Toledo and Elko, about 9 and 12 laps down respectively. RYR42 then ran its only intermediate track in 2017 at Pocono, where at 27 laps, Brad was parked for being too slow and finished in 31st. After Hilton brought a different car to Michigan, then ran at Madison to a 16th place finish 15 laps down, and at Iowa, Smith finished 17th at Iowa 8 laps down. The car did not make the second trip out to Pocono or run at IRP, then instead ran at Winchester where he DNF'd after 86 laps and finished 19th. Unfortunately, the car would meet its final match at Springfield in 2017, where Smith was caught in a terrible crash with Riley Herbst, who was turned by Dalton Sargent, and while trying to slow down to avoid the wreck, Smith hit very hard into the back of Herbst as other cars then piled in from behind trying to slow down. Unfortunately, RYI-42 could not be saved after this crash, and the car was retired. After the unfortunate passing of James Harvey Hilton in April 2018, Brad Smith bought Hilton's equipment and restarted his team. In an update from 2021, RYR42 currently sits in Brad Smith's own race car graveyard. Our third chassis is RYR54, built sometime in 2005, and it ran 9 cup races with, you guessed it, Dale Jarrett behind the wheel. It ran 3 out of the 4 last cup races in 2005, debuting at Atlanta with a 14th place finish, Texas finishing 12th, skipping Phoenix and running Homestead where it finished 17th. It ran its first race in 2006 at the spring race at Texas to another 17th place finish. Then it ran Darlington where it finished 24th, and then it ran 2 consecutive races at Dover and Pocono where it finished 24th and 38th respectively. It didn't run again until the second trip to Pocono in 2006 where it finished 28th, and then the following week ran its final cup race at Indianapolis, also finishing 28th. It was later sold to Bruco Motorsports, and was then later sold off to Kimmel Racing. Some interesting facts I discovered in a Kimmel Racing Facebook Live included that it was the first ever chassis to have an ARCA composite body mounted, and that it's been used for Ilmore and composite body testing at Chicagoland Speedway. Kimmel also mentioned he once ran a 17.20 at Salem, and after doing some research, it appears that Will Kimmel drove it at the Fall Salem race in 2017, as he ran a 17.271 and qualified 5th, but finished 10th 5 laps down. It's unclear how many races it has run for Kimmel Racing, but we do know it ran at Daytona in 2023, and tested there with Coldwater, Michigan's Gage Rogers driving RYR54. Fun fact, he was only 2 years old when this car first debuted at Atlanta. At 2023 Daytona testing, Rogers was 37th fastest out of the 61 drivers who took a timed lap. RYR54 then came back to Daytona and practiced in 30th, but did not take a timed lap in qualifying and started 37th. Rogers was able to finish on the lead lap, and kept the car clean, but with how competitive the field was, he finished back in 26th. Gage was hoping to come back and run Talladega again in the 68, likely using RYR54 again, but could not get enough sponsorship. RYR will once again ride on the high banks of Daytona in testing in January. The fourth chassis in this video is RYR65, which is yet another Dale Jarrett race car. It ran 3 out of the 4 plate races in 2006, and also ran in the Daytona 500 qualifying dual race number 1, and finished 13th. As a result, Jarrett started 25th in the 2006 Daytona 500, and would finish 10th, a top 10 for its first race. It did not run in Talladega in the spring as RYR10 was brought out, which interestingly enough was the car Jarrett won in the fall of 2005, and even has race history dating back to 1995. At Daytona in July, Jarrett would start in 7th and lead 1 lap on lap 49 during green flag pit stops. He'd finish in 22nd on the lead lap. Then at Talladega in October, qualified on the front row with rookie teammate David Gilliland on the pole. More on him later. Jarrett would lead the first lap but quickly lose the lead to Jeff Gordon. Jarrett would finish in a decent 12th place after being used as a backup car in the 2007 Daytona 500 with Ricky Rudd. Rudd would drive RYR65 in the final Gen 4 Cup race at Talladega. Ricky Rudd would qualify in 5th, but would be caught up in a crash on lap 132. The car would return to the track, but would finish in 33rd place, 37 laps down. It's unclear if it ran the July race at Daytona or not, but it was sold off in 2008 to Howard Bixman Racing, and it ran at Talladega in 2009 with Grant Enfinger behind the wheel. Enfinger would start in 8th and finish in 3rd, better than any of its finishes in the Cup Series. After 2011, Bixman sold it off to owner Doug Stringer. RYR65 would run at Talladega with Iowa driver Zach Ralston behind the wheel. Ralston took the grid in 36th place and was caught up in an incident on lap 75 where he turned fellow driver Michael Afferrano upside down after contact. Despite this, Ralston would still finish in 16th on the lead lap. It's unclear if it ran any other races under Doug Stringer's or Zach Ralston's ownership, but it was then sold to Fredericksburg, Virginia's Willie Mullins in the 2014-15 offseason. First ran with the number 1 and fellow Virginia driver J.J. Pack behind the wheel. Pack started shotgun on the field in 40th place, but suffered a very scary fire on lap 55 under caution. Pack was able to get out under his own power and finished in 36th. Willie Mullins himself would take over the driver role in 2016 and run both plate races. Using the owner points from Darrell Basham Racing with the number 34, Mullins would qualify in 26th place and finish in 8th. For Talladega, Mullins would qualify in 6th, but finish in 17th, still on the lead lap though. For 2017, Mullins would once again use Basham's owner points for the plate races, and at Daytona he qualified a strong 5th, but unfortunately, he was caught up in an early wreck on lap 6, and Mullins would finish in last place, 40th. After qualifying got rained out for Talladega, Mullins started in 11th as the 34 team ran the whole season with owner points. Mullins finished in 16th, one lap down. For 2018, as ARCA mandated composite bodies in both plate races, the car was converted to a composite body and kept a Ford. This time, as another team was using Basham's 34 number, Mullins ran the number 3 with Wayne Hickson's owner points this time at Daytona. Mullins would qualify in 9th, and after avoiding all of the craziness and accidents at the end of the race, Mullins would give RYR65 its best finish to date in 2nd. Mullins did not enter Talladega in 2018 or 2019, but did run at Daytona again in 2019. By this point, Wayne Hickson had shut down his ARCA team after the end of 2018, and Mullins would take over ownership of the number 3 number. Mullins qualified a strong 4th, but then sadly crashed out on lap 3 with Michael Self. Mullins once again finished last in 35th position. For 2020, Mullins would once again enter the number 3 at Daytona and qualified 21st. On lap 40, he was caught up in the big one, but suffered little to no damage, and was able to continue. He was able to stay on the lead lap and finish in 8th. Like many race teams, once the COVID-19 pandemic hit, a lot of teams in ARCA had to scale back on their plans like Mullins Racing. Mullins had been planning to make his first trip to Talladega since 2017 with RYR65 again, but he did not have the funds to field his own car. However, a phone call from Fast Track team owner Andy Hillenberg came in wondering why he wasn't entered. Hillenberg then made an offer to pick up Mullins' car, RYR65, at Mullins' race shop in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He would also transport and service it at the track while also using the Fast Track Racing number 11 for the first race as at the time, that car was supposed to start and park with Tommy Vi Jr. behind the wheel. Vi Jr. was then moved into the 01 and bumping Dick Doheny out, who would end up crew chiefing for Mullins that race. Due to no qualifying being held, grid was set by owner points and the number 11 would start 12th. Unfortunately, Mullins was not able to keep up with the draft and was lapped early on. To make matters worse, the car suffered oil pressure issues and would drop out on lap 24. This marked the first race of Mullins' collaborations with Fast Track Racing, in which he has run 8 using Hillenberg's numbers ever since. For 2021, Mullins was planning to enter 2 cars at Daytona as he had purchased another plate car. This one being the KBR 28 car that David Gravel didn't even have a door on at one point in the 2020 running. The plan was for RYR65 to be entered as a second car, and it did test at Daytona as well. Davey Callahan was intended to be the driver, but could not get enough funding, and RYR65 did not race in 2021. For 2022, Mullins did end up entering 2 cars at both plate races with the 3 and 03, using owner points from Alex Club's own operation. RYR65 was used as the second car with the one pizza man, Brayton Laster, driving. Laster in his ARCA Menards Series debut would qualify in 17th, but unfortunately on the start missed a shift and fell back. Laster was able to keep the car clean throughout the rest of the race, however, and finished in 13th on the lead lap, with Willie Mullins finishing right behind in 14th. For Talladega, due to 2021 owner points being used for qualifying, Laster would start way back in 31st, and had a hard time moving up as a result. He did get an onboard camera on the bright side. He did eventually make it up to the lead pack before unfortunately getting caught up in a scary accident on lap 48, where Richard Garvey ramped off of him and nearly went over. Laster then pulled off a funny stunt, waving off to the crowd, and earned a lot of fans from that moment, including myself. Laster DNF'd in 26th position. Laster then returned to run the 03 at Daytona again with a fresh paint scheme and a new Mustang body on the car. Qualifying in 20th, Laster ran clean until unfortunately running into the back of another car. He would finish in 27th on the lead lap though. The plan was for Laster and RYR65 to return at Talladega again, but unfortunately due to sponsorship issues, this deal fell through and Mullins Racing skipped Talladega altogether, with neither the 3 or 03 entering. Alex Clubb would end up starting and parking his own 03 at Talladega as a result to keep the car full time. As of now, Mullins is planning to race Daytona again in the 3 and is planning to enter a second car for another driver and potentially even a third. As a result, there are good odds that RYR65 will be entered once again in 2024. Our final chassis in this video is RYR72, which was built in 2006. Its first race is believed to be the 2006 Fall Talladega race where it struck gold early. As mentioned earlier in the last segment, Robert Yates Racing would sweep the front row as David Gilliland would win his first career pole in only his 9th career NASCAR Cup Series start. Gilliland's 38 did not lead any laps that day, but he did keep the car clean and ran all the laps, finishing in 15th. Kimmel Racing had later gotten the car and would run it first at Daytona 2014. Will Kimmel would drive it at 4 straight plate races and qualified a decent 8th at Daytona with it. But on lap 12, however, the car was destroyed in a 14-car wreck early on. The car would be repaired in time for Talladega, though, and took the grid in 6th. He was running a very impressive 4th before, unfortunately, the engine let go on lap 27 and finished in last place, 36th. When the car came back to Daytona in 2015, Kimmel would qualify in 8th and was even going for the lead at one point on Grant Enfinger. Kimmel would give the car its first recorded top 10 finish in 10th. At Talladega in 2015, Kimmel gave the car yet another great qualifying run in 5th. Unfortunately, he and Grant Enfinger would make contact on lap 66, taking both cars out of the race, and then a hard-charging Clay Campbell slammed hard into the 69 of Kimmel. RYR72 did not race in 2016, but it did in 2017, as the Kimmels would lease it to Travis Braden, who ran it at Daytona with the 01 car. He'd qualify in 25th, and while he was able to avoid multiple wrecks, Braden would have a tire go down on a restart with 9 laps to go, and he'd finish in 22nd, 2 laps down. Then it was sold to Chad Bryant Racing at some point later, and it did run at Talladega 2020 as evident via Kimmel Racing Facebook Live. Brandon Lynn drove the number 22 Ford that race and was placed in 16th through the metric system being used for qualifying. On lap 13, while running in 8th, Brandon Lynn began to have mechanical issues and would make another stop too, as the issues were still not solved. Brandon Lynn would end up finishing in 15th, 7 laps down, and the last car running on track. Chad Bryant Racing would shut down their ARCA program after 2020, and Kimmel Racing ended up buying RYR72 back from them. First ran again with Kimmel at Daytona in 2022. This time, Kimmel would run the number 68 and would qualify in 27th. However, on lap 50, Kimmel would be caught up in a wreck with Jason Kitzmiller and finished in 35th out of the race. Kimmel was hoping to run this car again at Talladega, but could not acquire enough sponsorship. Car then returned again, being rebodied as a Mustang at Daytona in 2023 with Scott Melton driving. It tested at Daytona and debuted as a beautiful navy blue base when it came to the track in February. Melton would qualify in 8th, showing the power of the Mustang, but things came crashing down, literally, on lap 12, as while Melton was running 7th, he was hooked into the wall by Bryce Hageberg on the backstretch, ending his day and destroying the car. You could clearly see here how Melton was very frustrated, as Kimmel had worked very hard to get RYR72 ready for him. As a result, the car did not run at Talladega and was fully rebuilt later on. Scott Melton himself would purchase a new super speedway car for Kimmel Racing to include in their fleet, a former DGR Ford that Todd Gilliland won at Talladega in 2019 and ran it there. The good news, however, is that RYR72 will be testing once again in 2024 at Daytona with Scott Melton behind the wheel once again. I would like to thank everyone for watching this video. If this does good enough, I will probably do a sequel, maybe focusing on something like Brad Smith's cars. And hopefully you guys also check out everyone in the description, as everyone who is credited will be credited there in the description. So thank you guys for watching. Subscribe if you are not subscribed. Hit that like button on this video as well. Hit that notification bell as well to keep up with future videos and live streams I do over here. Share my channel with your friends too. Get me out there more. You can also find me on various other social media platforms in the description of this video. You can also even sponsor my channel for as little as just only $1 a month. And find any other way to support me here if possible. My name is Adam Relkin, aka Sir Relkinstein, and thank you for watching this video. Have a nice day.